The match that broke the system. American brands went into emergency meetings. Tournament directors started making calls behind closed doors. Broadcast executives recalculated their projections in real time. Alex Eala didn't simply win a tennis match. She cracked open the entire ecosystem of the sport. And what happened afterward caught everyone off guard. It wasn't predicted. It wasn't budgeted. It definitely wasn't planned. This wasn't another feel-good rags to riches tale. It was a sudden, undeniable wake-up call that forced the tennis world to confront a new reality. For years, insiders had quietly tracked her progress, noting the solid results, acknowledging the obvious talent, filing her away under promising prospect for the future. Then came the match that changed the conversation overnight. It began like countless others on the schedule. No special billing, no match hype, just another name listed among the day's fixtures. But from the moment Eala stepped onto the court, the atmosphere felt different. She wasn't merely competing. She was in command, playing with a presence that immediately demanded attention. Within the first set, the energy shifted, in the arena and online alike. Casual viewers who had tuned in out of mild curiosity stayed glued to their screens. Then they leaned in. Then they started sharing clips with friends. What began as just another match quickly started to feel like something far bigger, a declaration of arrival. Roughly 40 minutes in, the viewer numbers began climbing at an alarming rate. First 50,000 live streams, then 500,000. Then millions. Streaming platforms braced for standard tournament traffic suddenly faced surges nobody had prepared for. Internal alerts fired off. Technical teams scrambled to keep servers stable under loads they'd never anticipated for a regular tour event. And still, the audience kept growing. By the time the final set unfolded, the numbers had reached almost surreal territory. Tens of millions of viewers locked in worldwide. Not just from tennis's traditional strongholds in Europe and North America, but from every corner of the globe, across Asia, through parts of Africa, into South America, spreading rapidly through Eastern Europe. Regions that had long sat on the margins of the sport's viewership suddenly became central to the story. This was no longer simply a tennis match. It had become a genuine global moment, a cultural shift that caught the entire industry flat-footed. What those millions were witnessing wasn't just high-level competition. They were drawn to something fresh, relatable, electrifying. A young player combining raw hunger with precision and an intensity that transcended borders, languages, and every preconceived notion of who tennis was supposed to be for. In that moment, the tennis establishment had a collective realization. They hadn't merely uncovered another rising star. They had underestimated a full-blown phenomenon. Nothing manufactured about it. What made this surge so remarkable was its authenticity. There was no pre-engineered hype campaign, no manufactured drama. It was excellence meeting genuine personality, happening in real time. Eala played with visible hunger, tactical sharpness, and an intensity that cut straight through the sport's traditional barriers. This didn't feel like standard competition. It felt like a new chapter in how women's tennis could be experienced, consumed, and embraced by audiences who had never connected with the sport before. Broadcast networks were caught completely off guard. The numbers defied every traditional pattern. Engagement wasn't confined to core markets. It exploded globally, instantly, and with remarkable staying power. Advertisers didn't even wait for post-match reports. They started reaching out within hours, because this wasn't a planned rollout. It was organic, unexpected, and precisely because of that, incredibly powerful. The boardrooms wake up. The real aftershocks, though, began unfolding away from the court. The following morning, inside corporate headquarters across Manhattan and beyond, reactions turned from surprise into urgent strategy sessions. At Nike, executives weren't just reviewing highlight reels. They were diving deep into data, viewer retention rates, regional spikes, age demographics, engagement patterns. At Rolex, analysts studied who was watching, where they came from, and why they stayed locked in. At Gatorade and other major brands, teams mapped out how a single match had activated entirely new consumer segments that had previously been considered nearly impossible to reach. This wasn't passing curiosity. It was strategic urgency, because what Eala represented wasn't just another talented athlete. She represented access. Access to markets tennis had struggled for years to meaningfully penetrate. Access to audiences who hadn't grown up with the sport but were now emotionally invested. Access to demographics that crossed every traditional boundary of age, geography, and culture. Younger viewers showed up in force and stayed. Emerging markets didn't just sample the content. They engaged deeply. Female viewership surged in places where the sport had historically struggled to gain any traction at all. For brands, that combination is exceptionally rare. For the sport itself, it felt transformative. The deals start moving the surge far exceeded even the most optimistic projections. Within 72 hours, one major American sportswear powerhouse made its move. Nike had spent years searching for a global ambassador who could connect organically with Southeast Asian markets without the connection feeling forced or artificial. In Eala, they finally saw exactly what they needed. Her story wasn't scripted. Her rise wasn't manufactured by a marketing department, and that authenticity resonated powerfully. Luxury brands moved with similar speed. Rolex saw more than exposure. They saw legacy potential in a champion who could carry prestige across generations and cultures. Other sectors followed suit just as quickly. Insurance companies recognized vitality and long-term appeal. Energy drink brands saw competitive edge and intensity. Marketing teams across entirely different industries converged on the exact same insight: genuine opportunity right in front of them. This was no longer simply about tennis. It was commerce recognizing a cultural moment and racing to be part of it. Offers poured in at a staggering pace. Initial figures in the six figures quickly escalated into seven, then eight figures annually. Contracts worth millions were drafted, reviewed, negotiated. What surprised even seasoned insiders wasn't just the size of the numbers, it was the nature of the terms. Brands weren't asking Eala to change her personality, soften her image, or fit into a predetermined mold. They wanted her exactly as she already was: focused, relentless, authentic, because that genuine quality was the single most valuable part of the brand she represented. Tournaments feel the tremor while corporations moved at high speed. Another quieter but equally significant shift was happening behind the scenes. Tournament organizers began to grasp the broader implications. If audiences followed Eala this passionately, then attention, sponsorship money, and global relevance would follow right alongside her. Suddenly, the sport's biggest stages, Wimbledon, the US Open, the Australian Open, the French Open, weren't just planning standard draws anymore. They were thinking strategically about positioning, broadcast windows, and maximizing exposure around what many now saw as the sport's next major attraction. The tremor was felt first in private meetings. At Wimbledon, selection committees held urgent discussions. Australian Open leadership began reassessing long-term lineups and scheduling. French Open officials quickly grasped the scale of the potential impact. If one player could generate this much global engagement from a regular tour-level event, the possibilities on tennis's grandest stages were enormous. Her rapidly filling calendar only added to the urgency. Regional tournaments began offering appearance fees rarely seen anywhere in women's tennis. Smaller events that typically flew under the radar suddenly made aggressive bids, not just for ranking points or prestige, but for the visibility and attention Eala brought with her. Tournament directors realized they weren't simply filling out a draw anymore. They were competing for a genuinely scarce resource: her time. That realization triggered an escalation. One event offered guarantees that dwarfed traditional structures. Another layered in bonus incentives, exhibition matches, payout bonuses, expanded prize pools. A third went further still, proposing to reorient significant portions of their entire event around her participation. What looked, on the surface, like smart business strategy masked something deeper: real urgency. This wasn't just about filling seats. It was about capturing a cultural wave before it passed. For years, many of these same tournaments had treated women's tennis as secondary programming. Now they were suddenly fighting for primetime slots, reworking schedules, pushing hard for maximum exposure, all around one name. Broadcasters rewrite the playbook. Broadcast partners noticed the shift just as fast. Networks began advocating for exclusive rights specifically tied to Eala's matches. Primetime slots were debated and renegotiated. Entire programming blocks were reconsidered because the fundamental equation had changed. Viewership was no longer guaranteed by tradition or legacy. It was increasingly driven by personal connection. And at that moment, no one on tour was creating stronger connections than Alex Eala. The change wasn't gradual. It was structural. For the first time in recent memory, the sport wasn't dictating what audiences should watch. Audiences had already made their choice clear. Marketing departments pivoted immediately, building campaigns around the mere possibility of her appearance. For decades, The tennis world had operated on comfortable predictability, legacy markets, familiar audiences, stable if modest growth. That comfort zone has now been disrupted. Every major decision runs through the same critical filter today. What happens if Eala plays? Will ticket sales spike? Can sponsorship packages command higher rates? Does the event gain instant global relevance? These aren't theoretical questions anymore. They're immediate and practical because the numbers offer undeniable proof. Rewriting the analytics, that massive viewership surge didn't just exceed expectations. It fundamentally rewrote the sports analytics framework. It outperformed typical numbers for even major Grand Slam sessions. It rivaled viewership for top-tier events in other major sports, and even brushed into territory usually reserved for global esports. But the real disruption wasn't the scale alone. It was the composition of the audience. Overwhelmingly, viewers came from regions with little to no historical connection to tennis. Markets long dismissed as secondary suddenly emerged as primary drivers. The demographic makeup shifted dramatically too. Younger audiences dominated, female engagement broke traditional benchmarks, and first-time viewers didn't just sample the action. They stayed, returned, and engaged deeply. For advertisers, that profile is pure gold. For tennis as a sport, it represents genuine transformation. Internal reports across the industry kept reaching the same conclusion. This wasn't a temporary spike. It was a clear signal of untapped potential. Eala hadn't just captured attention. She had provided access. Access to audiences tennis had never meaningfully reached. Access to regions previously written off. Access to a new generation that experiences sports entirely differently than the ones before it. Her impact spread far beyond the raw viewership numbers. Social media engagement multiplied. Search interest in women's tennis spiked dramatically across Southeast Asia and other emerging regions. Streaming subscriptions grew in markets that had shown almost no previous interest. Merchandise associated with her sold faster than anyone had projected. And crucially, viewership didn't collapse after the match ended. It held strong, with repeat audiences returning and engagement deepening over time. This was connection, not fleeting curiosity. Data analysts across multiple companies arrived at the same verdict. This surge was being driven by something durable: her playing style, her personality, her authentic story. A new ceiling in pure economic terms. The implications were staggering. One athlete had generated more organic global attention for women's tennis than many heavily funded institutional campaigns had managed to build. What entire organizations had struggled to achieve through years of traditional investment, she created through performance and presence alone. She didn't just grow the existing audience. She expanded the entire map of a sport. Tournament directors quickly translated these insights into practical strategy. Her participation wasn't merely valuable anymore. It had become leverage. Broadcast deals could be renegotiated at higher rates. Sponsorship inventory could command premium pricing. Ticket demand could justify elevated pricing tiers because the proof of return on investment was now undeniable. For decades, women's professional tennis under the WTA umbrella had operated beneath an unspoken ceiling. Media rights values lagged behind the men's game. Sponsorship spending followed cautious, predictable patterns. Coverage, while slowly improving, still fought for parity. That ceiling didn't shatter overnight, but Eala's impact cracked it wide open. The sport hadn't been fully global before. Now it was being forced to confront that reality head-on. Not promise, proof. The conversation has fundamentally changed. Women's tennis is no longer framed primarily as secondary programming or a developmental sideshow. It's being recognized as elite competition and premium entertainment in its own right. Not future promise, but current proof. At the center of that shift stands a player who didn't simply rise through the existing system. She compelled the system to evolve around her. Alex Eala didn't just become a star. She became a catalyst, a turning point pushing the entire sport toward change it badly needed. What she proved wasn't theoretical. It was measurable. In concrete numbers, in shifting behaviors. Interest in women's tennis isn't niche, conditional, or limited. It's global, authentic, and capable of massive scale the moment it's given the right platform. Tens of millions of viewers. Scrambling tournament directors. Major American brands committing serious resources overnight. These developments don't just signal one player's individual success. They point to something bigger. Broader transformation across an entire sport. This is how industries actually evolve. Not through slow, incremental steps, but through rare, Undeniable moments where exceptional talent meets the perfect platform and generates momentum too powerful to ignore. For years, the tennis world operated on long-held assumptions about its audience and its reach. Now it's reacting to a new reality. What global viewers recognized instantly, the industry is only just beginning to fully process. Women's tennis has always possessed elite entertainment value. It simply needed the right moment and the right player to reveal its full potential. That moment has arrived, and her name is Alex Eala. She hasn't just elevated her own career. She's expanded the boundaries of what the sport itself can achieve. Her legacy is still being written, but the foundation is already transformative. She has redefined what's possible. If this trajectory continues, the conversation will move beyond rankings and titles entirely. It will center on impact. Some players win matches. Some win championships. A very few change the game itself. Alex Eala is firmly on that path. If you enjoyed this story and want more in-depth updates like it, subscribe to Tennis Filtered, turn on the notification bell, like this video, and share your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.